He was a man of contracts and billion-dollar deals, not of promises. But that changed the day a boy walked into his office. Richard Hayes, a hardened tech CEO known for running an empire with precision and little patience, never expected to be interrupted by an 8-year-old holding a homemade kite and a handwritten note that simply read, "I make kites. I can run fast. I want to save my sister. Please." In a city where most people pass each other without a second glance, this small boy with tired sneakers and unwavering eyes refuses to give up. His name is Noah, and he's on a mission to save his sister from leukemia, no matter what it takes. All he has is hope, determination, and a photo in his backpack that Richard isn't ready to understand. What happens when the most guarded man in the city finds himself face to face with a child's silent plea and a past he thought he buried forever? This is not just a story about illness or business or even kites. It's about rediscovering family in the most unexpected places and how love, even from strangers, can rebuild a life. Stick around to see how a boy's faith changes everything. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe. There's more where this came from. Richard Hayes didn't like surprises. His world operated on schedules, projections, and silence. Well, the kind of silence money buys. From the 57th floor of his tech empire's headquarters, he controlled supply chains, investments, and mergers like a maestro with a digital baton. At 49, his smile was rare, and his heart, well, if it had once felt anything, it now beat beneath layers of steel and solitude. But that Thursday morning, something unexpected happened. Janet, his assistant of 12 years, tapped lightly on the glass of his office door. "There's a boy here," she said, her voice tinged with hesitation. "He insists on seeing you." Richard didn't look up. "Tell him we don't take walk-ins." "He's not asking for a job," Janet replied. "He has a letter, and he won't leave." Something in her tone, maybe concern, maybe curiosity, made him glance up. She handed him a crumpled, folded sheet of notebook paper, the kind schoolchildren used. Richard unfolded it with a sigh. In a child's uneven handwriting it read, "I make kites. I can run fast. I want to save my sister. Please." Below the message was a name, Noah, age 8. Richard stared at the note for a long second. 8 years old? "Yes," Janet said. "He's waiting by the elevator, alone." The silence stretched. "Send him in," Richard finally said. The door opened moments later, and a small boy stepped inside, his backpack frayed, his jeans a little too short, his sneakers taped where soles had worn thin. But his eyes, they were clear, steady, and unflinching. "You're Mr. Hayes," the boy said, voice soft but sure. "I saw your face on a sign in the park, so I came." Richard arched a brow. "What sign?" "The billboard, for Hayes Robotics. It said you solve problems." Noah fidgeted, then carefully unzipped his backpack and pulled out a neatly rolled plastic bag. Inside was a handful of small, handmade kites, each crafted from colorful plastic, twine, and popsicle sticks. "I sell these," he said, "to raise money." Richard didn't know how to respond. "Why?" Noah's shoulders squared, his voice steadied. "To help my sister. She's really sick. Mom says she has something called leukemia. The treatments cost a lot, and she sleeps a lot now." The words landed with a quiet thud in the sterile room. Noah continued, determined. "I want to work," he said. "I'm fast. I can help carry boxes, or clean, or fold stuff. But I don't want money. I want help, for Mia." Richard leaned back, staring at this tiny figure who spoke like a man with a mission. "Where are your parents?" "Mom's working 2 jobs. Dad left when Mia got sick." Richard nodded slowly, then motioned toward the bag. "You made all these?" Noah nodded proudly. "Mia taught me." before she got too tired. She said they're like little hopes flying in the sky, so I started selling them at the park. And you thought I'd, what, buy them all? No, Noah said seriously. I thought maybe you'd care. It was the most disarming thing Richard had heard in years. No business pitch, no manipulation, just a boy asking a stranger to care. You rode your bike here? He asked quietly. Noah nodded. In this weather? She gets cold easy, Noah whispered. The hospital bill last time was really bad. Richard stood slowly, glancing at the kites again, then back at the note. You came here with a bag of kites and a note because you believe I can help, he said. Yes, sir. Richard walked around the desk and crouched to eye level. Tell me where she is. Noah blinked. You mean, you'll come? Richard nodded. I don't make promises often, Noah, but if I say I'll come, I do. The boy stared at him, expression unreadable for a moment. Then, softly, he said, Okay. As Janet watched Richard grab his coat, something she hadn't seen him do mid-morning in years, she whispered, Is this wise? Richard looked back, his voice softer than usual. He wrote a letter to the world, Janet, and no one answered. So I will. And with that, he followed Noah into the elevator, down into a city full of strangers, chasing something that money had never bought him, meaning. The cab ride was quiet, the city outside blurred by winter's breath. Noah sat beside Richard, legs swinging above the floor mat, hands gripping the handles of his backpack. He looked straight ahead, jaw set like someone who had made up his mind long ago. Richard watched him through the reflection in the window. It was surreal. This 8-year-old boy had walked into his office with a crumpled note and changed the course of his day, maybe his life. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Even Richard, the man who ruled over conference rooms and capital ventures, didn't know how to fill it. She's at St. Mary's, Noah finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's not a fancy hospital, but the nurses are nice. They don't get mad when I fall asleep in the chair. Richard nodded slowly. How long has she been sick? Since last year. Noah looked down at the fraying strap on his bag. At first, it was just bruises. Then she got really tired. Then her hair started falling out. He paused. Mom cried a lot in the bathroom when she thought I couldn't hear. Richard swallowed, the knot in his throat unexpected. And your mom? Where is she now? Working. She's always working. She cleans houses, takes care of old people. She used to smile more. Richard's gaze dropped to the boy's shoes, taped together, scuffed, too small, then to the kite sticking out of the backpack. A strange ache crept into his chest. Why me, Noah? He asked gently. There are thousands of people in this city. Noah turned to him then, eyes unwavering. Because you looked kind in the picture. Richard's breath caught. No one had used that word to describe him in years. The cab pulled to a stop outside St. Mary's Hospital, a squat, aging building on the edge of downtown. Noah hopped out before the driver could open the door. Richard followed, suddenly aware of how much his tailored coat and Italian shoes didn't belong here. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and something stale, like time and waiting. Nurses in scrubs rushed past. A baby cried in the distance. An intercom crackled. Noah moved through the lobby with practiced steps, nodding to the woman behind the reception desk. She's in room 214, he said. Second floor, east wing. As they rode the elevator, Richard asked, Does she know you're bringing someone? Noah shook his head. She's been asleep a lot. Sometimes she doesn't wake up for a whole day. The elevator doors opened. The hallway was narrow and dimly lit. They passed doors labeled with hand-drawn rainbows and names in colorful marker. Richard's stomach churned. Noah stopped at a door with a paper butterfly taped to it. He pushed it open gently. Mia? He whispered. The room was quiet, but for the rhythmic beeping of a monitor. A girl lay in the bed, her figure small under a thin hospital blanket. Her head was bald, her skin pale, her lips cracked. An IV stand stood like a silent sentinel at her bedside. Noah stepped closer, brushing a piece of lint from her blanket. "I brought someone," he said. "The man from the sign. He said he wants to help." Richard stayed at the door, overwhelmed. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals with less tension in his chest. He stepped forward, hesitantly, and looked at the girl. She couldn't have been more than 15. Her fingers were curled loosely around a folded paper crane. On the side table was Noah's note, the same one he'd brought into the office. Noah had quietly taken it from his pocket and set it there, like a gift. "I know I'm just a kid," Noah said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I promised her I'd try." Richard exhaled slowly, his composure fraying at the edges. He walked to the bed and gently placed his hand over Mia's. "You're not just a kid, Noah," he said softly. "You're her hero." A nurse entered quietly, offering a nod before checking Mia's chart. "She's been stable today," she said kindly, "but we're limited in what we can do here. She needs more specialized care." Richard nodded. "Then she's getting it." The nurse looked up, surprised. "Are you family?" He didn't hesitate. "I am, now." As the words left his mouth, something shifted inside him. A wall, long kept intact, cracked just slightly. He didn't know Mia. He barely knew Noah, but something in their courage, their quiet hope, called to a part of him he thought had died long ago. And as Noah stood by his sister's side, gripping her hand with every ounce of strength his small frame held, Richard made a silent promise. He wouldn't walk away, not this time. The next morning, the city awoke beneath a veil of early fog. But inside the corner suite of St. Mary's, the day began with hushed footsteps and gentle voices. Richard hadn't left the hospital. He'd spent the night in a vinyl-covered chair by Mia's bed, coat folded neatly over his lap, eyes drifting between sleep and memory. A stirred first, curled on the small bench beneath the window, a thin hospital blanket tucked around him. He blinked up at Richard and gave a sleepy smile. "You stayed." Richard nodded, stretching slowly. "Of course." Noah sat up, running a hand through his tangled hair. "She didn't wake up." "No," Richard said softly, "but she will. We're going to get her help." Just then, a nurse entered with a clipboard and a warm smile. "Good morning, gentlemen. Dr. Kessler is making rounds soon, but I heard some big decisions were made last night." Richard rose to his feet, his voice calm but resolute. "She's being transferred today. I've already spoken to the administration and arranged for a private ambulance. She'll be admitted to Children's National by noon." The nurse's eyebrows lifted. "That's one of the best in the country." "She deserves the best." Noah looked up at him, eyes wide. "Really? You meant it?" "I told you I don't break promises," Richard replied gently. For a moment, Noah didn't say anything. Then he stood and hugged Richard, small arms wrapping tightly around the man's waist. Richard's breath caught. The hug was firm, innocent, and completely trusting. It shook something loose inside him. By noon, the transfer had taken place. Richard rode in the second vehicle, following closely behind the ambulance as it wound its way toward the top-tier pediatric hospital across town. On the seat beside him lay a single kite, tattered and bent but unmistakably handcrafted, its tail made of knotted red string. Richard picked it up, his fingers brushing the frame. A child's hands made this, carefully, lovingly. At the new hospital, the difference in care was immediate. Mia was wheeled into a private room painted with murals of ocean waves and gentle skies. Nurses greeted Noah like he was royalty. A team of specialists was already reviewing her chart. Richard watched it all unfold from a few steps back, quietly absorbing. "Will she like it here?" Noah asked. "I think she'll feel the difference," Richard said, "and she'll know you got her here." Later that evening, after the tests and IVs were settled, Richard and Noah sat together in the quiet lounge overlooking the city. Snow had begun to fall outside, dusting the skyline in delicate white. Noah reached into his backpack and pulled out a creased photograph. "I want to show you something." Richard leaned in. The photo was old, maybe 20 years. It showed a man standing on a beach, a kite flying high above him. He was laughing, shirt sleeves rolled, sun in his eyes. "That's my uncle," Noah said proudly. "He used to take my mom and me to the coast. He taught her how to build kites." Richard felt like his lungs had stopped working. Because the man in the photo, he looked exactly like Daniel, his brother. The brother Richard had lost 15 years ago in a car accident. The brother who'd been the only person to ever soften his sharp ambition with warmth and laughter. Noah watched him carefully. "You okay?" Richard swallowed hard. "Where did your mom get this picture?" "It was in her old scrapbook. She said the man was family. Said she never told him everything, but that he would have helped if he'd known." The air thickened with emotion. Richard couldn't take his eyes off the photo. He could still hear Daniel's laugh, still remember the way he used to throw rocks into the ocean like they were secrets being carried away. Noah's voice was quieter now. "She said she never wanted pity, just someone to believe in us." Richard closed his eyes. Emily. It had to be her. Daniel's girlfriend from college. She'd vanished after the funeral, heartbroken, unreachable. Had she been pregnant? Had she been carrying Daniel's child? This boy? Noah. His nephew. Richard looked at the boy beside him. So brave, so full of purpose. A child who had walked into a skyscraper with a handwritten note and changed the course of his future. Suddenly, the empire Richard had built, its boardrooms, its forecasts, its bottom lines, felt hollow compared to the truth seated beside him. He put a hand on Noah's shoulder, steadying his voice. "We're going to fight for her, every day, and I won't let you go through this alone." Noah nodded solemnly, and for the first time since they met, he looked relieved. In the reflection of the glass, Richard saw them sitting side by side. A boy with a dream made of paper and string, and a man rediscovering his soul. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more challenges, more battles. But tonight, they had each other, and that was a start. The next morning came softly, sunlight creeping in through tall windows and casting golden shapes across the pale hospital floor. The rhythm of beeping monitors and nurse footsteps echoed gently through the halls. But in room 214, Richard Hayes sat completely still, his eyes fixed on the photo Noah had handed him the night before. Daniel's face looked out at him through time. That wide grin, the wind-tousled hair, the carefree way he stood barefoot in the sand, it was unmistakable. It wasn't just resemblance. It was blood, legacy, love that never truly left. Richard turned the photo over again, his fingers lingering on the faded edge. A date was scribbled in blue ink on the back. July 18th, 2008, Cape Lookout. He remembered that trip. Daniel had begged him to join, but Richard had just launched Hayes Global and claimed he couldn't afford a vacation. He hadn't known then that Daniel would be gone 6 months later. He hadn't known how final some missed moments could be. Now, here was Noah, his nephew, and Mia, likely his niece, still sleeping, still fighting, still unaware that the man sitting quietly by her bed was her family in more ways than one. A soft knock broke the stillness. Noah peeked into the room, a cup of hot cocoa in both hands. "Morning," the boy said, voice still rough from sleep. "The lady at the desk said it was okay to bring this." Richard smiled gently. "That's kind of you. Thank you." He took the cup and motioned for Noah to sit. The boy climbed into the chair beside him and looked toward Mia, her face peaceful, though pale. "She moved a little earlier," Noah said hopefully. "I think she heard me humming." "She's strong," Richard replied, "and she's lucky to have you." Noah's smile faltered slightly. Mom used to say that too, that I was brave. I don't feel brave most days. You showed up in my office with a paper kite and a plan to save your sister, Richard said, his voice thick. That's braver than most grown men I know. Noah didn't speak right away. Then, almost shyly, he said, You remind me of the man in the picture. Mom said he used to fix everything, even when the world felt broken. Richard swallowed hard, emotion clawing at his throat. He tried. The boy stared at him a moment, head tilted slightly. Did you know him? There it was, the question Richard had been trying to answer himself since last night. Yes, he finally whispered. He was my brother. His name was Daniel. Noah's eyes widened slowly, realization dawning like sunlight breaking through fog. So, that means you're... Richard nodded, his voice barely audible. I think I'm your uncle. Noah's mouth parted in shock. Mom never said. She always said the man in the picture was good, that she didn't want to bother him. She wouldn't have been bothering me, Richard said softly. I wish I'd known. For a moment, they sat in silence, the truth settling in around them. A decade of separation, loss, and misunderstanding, now replaced with something delicate and new. I guess that means we're really family, Noah said, voice trembling with wonder, like, actually. Richard smiled through the pressure building behind his eyes. Yeah, buddy, we really are. The door creaked open again, and a nurse entered quietly. Mr. Hayes, Dr. Kessler is ready to speak with you about Mia's treatment plan. Richard stood immediately. Tell him I'll be there in 5. As the nurse left, Noah turned back to Mia and adjusted the blanket gently over her shoulders. She's going to be okay, right? Richard placed a hand on his shoulder. We're going to do everything we can. And you'll stay? Even when she gets better? Noah asked. You won't just disappear? The boy's voice cracked, so small and uncertain. I'm not going anywhere, Richard said firmly. You both have me now, for good. Noah leaned against him without asking, and Richard, for the first time in years, wrapped an arm around someone with genuine tenderness. This wasn't charity, it wasn't obligation, it was redemption, and, perhaps, fate. After meeting with Dr. Kessler, who outlined an aggressive but hopeful treatment schedule, Richard stepped out to call his legal team. I need to look into guardianship, he said quietly, standing beneath a tree on the hospital's front lawn. I want it to be official. If anything happens to Mia's aunt, or if she's not able to care for them, I want to be next in line. Actually, I want to be first. There was a pause on the other end. Understood, sir. We'll get started immediately. Richard hung up and looked toward the sky. A kite fluttered high in the distance, held by a child in the park across the street. The tail danced like a ribbon against the blue. He smiled. His world was changing, not through power or profit, but through the quiet, relentless hope of 2 kids who had nothing to give but love. And that, he realized, was everything. It rained that evening. Not the kind of sharp, cold rain Richard usually associated with bad days, but a slow, quiet drizzle that seemed more like a whisper from the sky than a storm. From Mia's hospital room, the city blurred through the glass window, lights bleeding together in gentle motion. Inside, it was warm, almost peaceful. Richard sat in the armchair, legs crossed, watching Noah draw. The boy knelt at a small table beneath the window, focused intently on a new kite design, his tongue poking slightly from the corner of his mouth. Crayons were scattered everywhere, red, blue, green, and a folded napkin served as inspiration, a dragon with wings as wide as the sky. She'll love that, Richard said gently. Noah looked up. It's for her, for when she wakes up again. She said once that if she could fly, she'd want to be a dragon. Big, strong, but kind. Richard smiled. Sounds like her. Do you think she'll wake up tomorrow? The question was small, fragile, spoken with the kind of aching hope only children dared speak aloud. I think she's fighting as hard as she can, Richard replied softly, and I think you being here makes her stronger. Noah nodded slowly. She always said we're better together. Richard turned toward the bed. Mia lay still, but less pale than before. The new hospital, the best in the region for pediatric care, had brought a slight color back to her cheeks. Her breathing, though quiet, had a steady rhythm now. Monitors beeped gently, machines tracking every heartbeat like quiet reassurance. A knock tapped lightly on the door. Richard rose and opened it to find a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile. Her name tag read Cynthia Alvarez, social worker. "Mr. Hayes," she greeted. "May I come in for a moment?" "Of course." She stepped inside and glanced kindly at Noah before continuing. "I wanted to update you. Mia's aunt, Sarah, is still out of state. She's cooperating, but has asked that you remain Mia and Noah's emergency contact until she returns." Richard nodded. "I'll do whatever they need." Cynthia studied him. "Noah mentioned something about you being their uncle?" "I didn't know until yesterday," Richard admitted. "Their mother never reached out, but my brother, Daniel, was Noah's father. I recognized the photo." Cynthia's expression softened. "That explains a lot." "I've already asked my legal team to begin paperwork," he added. "I'm not going anywhere." Cynthia glanced toward the children, her voice dropping to a gentler tone. "I see a lot of well-meaning people who come and go. They bring gifts, say nice things, but it's rare someone shows up and stays." Richard's jaw tensed slightly. "I stayed away from the people who needed me once. I won't make that mistake again." She nodded, clearly moved. "That's all I needed to hear tonight." As Cynthia stepped out, Noah padded softly to Richard's side. "Was that lady here to ask if we're getting taken away?" Richard bent down to eye level. "She just wanted to make sure you two are safe, and I told her you are, as long as you're with me." Noah took a moment to absorb that, then whispered, "She said something about our aunt. Will she take us back when she comes?" "If that's what's best for you and Mia," Richard said honestly, "we'll make that decision together. But I want you to know, if I can be your family, I will." Noah looked down. "I'd like that." Later that night, Richard sat alone by Mia's bedside after Noah had fallen asleep in a nearby recliner wrapped in a blanket. The room was quiet but full of memory, of possibility, of something warmer than Richard had allowed himself to feel in years. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple silver locket, his mother's, long since forgotten in a drawer. He hadn't known why he'd brought it that morning, only that he felt he might need it. Gently, he placed the locket on Mia's bedside table. "You have no idea how much you already mean to me," he said, voice low and reverent. "I don't know how to be a father. I barely knew how to be a brother, but I'm learning, Mia, because of you and Noah, and I swear to you, I will never walk away." At that moment, a soft rustle stirred beneath the hospital blanket. Mia shifted slightly, her fingers twitching. Then, miraculously, her lips parted and she murmured a name. "Noah!" Richard stood up abruptly, his heart surging. Mia's eyes fluttered open, barely more than a squint, but it was enough. Enough to see the light, enough to hear the man she'd never met speak her name with trembling awe. "Mia," Richard whispered, "you're safe." She blinked slowly, lips dry, expression dazed. "Who?" "I'm Richard," he said, voice cracking. "Your uncle, the one who was too late. But I'm here now." Tears sprang uninvited into Richard's eyes. And for the first time in years, as the rain faded outside and the city lights gleamed like stars, something inside Richard Hayes cracked open. It was the beginning of everything he didn't know he'd been missing. Mia's eyes, though faint and bleary, held a quiet awareness. Her lips parted once more as she took in the softly humming machines, the ceiling she didn't recognize, and the face of a man with tears in his eyes who wasn't a doctor, but wasn't a stranger either. "Uncle Richard?" she whispered, her voice thin as mist. Richard leaned in closer, gently clasping her frail hand between his own. "Yes, I'm here, sweetheart. I'm so glad you're awake." Her brows drew together, confusion creasing her delicate features. "Noah? He's sleeping, just over there." Richard nodded toward the blanket-covered lump in the chair. "He's been waiting for this moment, for you, every day." A single tear rolled down Mia's cheek. "I thought I was dreaming. I kept hearing his voice, and then yours." "You weren't dreaming," Richard whispered, brushing her knuckles with his thumb. "You're safe. You're here, and I'm going to do everything I can to keep you that way." Mia's lashes fluttered closed briefly, as if holding on to the warmth of his words. When she opened them again, she asked weakly, "Why now?" The question stabbed deeper than Richard anticipated. "I didn't know," he admitted, his voice trembling with the weight of those words. "Your mom never told me. I didn't even know Daniel had children. She tried," Mia rasped. "Letters. Sent. Photos." Richard's breath caught. "I never received them." Mia nodded faintly. She said, "Maybe you were too busy." The honesty in her voice was a blade, gentle, but sharp enough to cut, and Richard knew she was right. He had been too busy, building empires, buying silence, avoiding the pain of his past by surrounding himself with meaningless noise. "I was," he said softly, "and I was wrong." Mia's eyes softened with something dangerously close to forgiveness. "You're here now," she whispered. He nodded, heart breaking. "And I'm not going anywhere." Just then, the chair beside the window shifted. Noah stirred, sat up groggily, and blinked into the low light of the hospital room. When he saw his sister awake, the blanket fell from his shoulders. "Mia!" She turned her head weakly toward the sound. Noah rushed to her side, wide-eyed with hope. "You're really awake," he gasped, gripping her hand as if afraid she'd disappear again. "I knew it. I told you I'd find help. I found him. He came." Mia gave the smallest of smiles. "You always believe." "I had to," Noah whispered back fiercely. "You're my big sister." The two of them sat there, fingers intertwined. No grand speeches, no dramatic music, just the quiet miracle of love in its purest, most resilient form. Richard stepped back, overcome. Watching the two of them, he suddenly felt like a guest in a sacred moment. But then Noah turned to him. "She woke up because of you," the boy said with the tear-filled eyes. "No," Richard replied honestly. "She woke up because she's strong, because she didn't give up, just like you." Later that morning, the doctors confirmed the impossible. Mia's vitals were stabilizing. The aggressive treatment, paired with the timing of her awakening, meant she could begin the next phase. Intensive, but hopeful. "She'll need months of therapy," the lead physician said, "but she has a real shot now." Richard nodded, his resolve crystallizing. "She'll get whatever she needs." The news spread through the hospital floor quickly. Nurses smiled as they passed, and even the receptionist, usually stern, greeted Richard with a soft nod of approval. Word had gotten out. That same afternoon, Richard was approached by a hospital administrator with a clipboard and hesitant eyes. "Mr. Hayes, there's been a request from the state. A social worker wants to know if you're open to discussing long-term guardianship." Richard didn't hesitate. "Yes. We'll need paperwork, background checks, interviews." "I said yes," Richard repeated more firmly. The administrator nodded, then smiled. Genuine, relieved. "Thank you." Back in the hospital room, Mia rested while Noah curled up beside her. Richard watched from the doorframe, silhouetted by the hallway light. He felt something shift inside him again, a quiet, seismic reordering of values. His phone buzzed. It was his assistant, Diane. Board meeting at 4 p.m. Clients waiting. Should I reschedule? Again? He looked at the screen, then up at Mia and Noah. Richard. Yes. Reschedule. I'm where I need to be. He turned the phone off completely. That evening, after dinner trays were cleared, Richard sat beside Noah on the hospital couch. The boy was quiet, staring out of the window. "You okay?" Richard asked softly. Noah nodded, then glanced at him. "Are you going to stay, even after Mia gets better?" The question lingered. Richard reached out, gently ruffling the boy's hair. "I'm not leaving, Noah," he said firmly. "I don't want to just help. I want to be a part of this, of you, of your lives." Noah leaned against him, not quite hugging, but not far from it. "I think Mia would like that," the boy whispered. Richard closed his eyes, the warmth of that moment wrapping around him like a second chance finally accepted. The next few days passed in a rhythm that was entirely new to Richard Hayes. No board meetings, no investor calls, no luxury cars or executive suites, just the sound of hospital machines, whispered conversations, and the quiet strength of two children whose lives had been anything but easy. Each morning, Richard arrived at the pediatric oncology wing before sunrise with warm breakfast in hand. Scrambled eggs for Noah, dry toast, and applesauce for Mia, who was slowly regaining her appetite. He'd sit by her bedside, reading aloud from a collection of short stories he had once loved as a boy, adjusting his voice with a theatrical flair whenever Noah requested it. One morning, as Richard read a passage about a knight rescuing his kingdom, Mia interrupted with a fragile smile. "You read like someone who's never had to ask for anything." Richard blinked, then chuckled softly. "That's probably true, until now." She tilted her head, her voice quiet but firm. "You're asking to be in our lives, aren't you?" He met her gaze. "I am, if you'll let me." The girl who had once been too weak to open her eyes now looked at him with startling clarity. "Noah already decided. He talks about you like you're already part of the family." Richard smiled, but the emotion in his chest tightened. "And what about you?" Mia paused, then reached for her brother's sketchbook from the bedside drawer. She opened it, revealing a rough pencil drawing of 3 stick figures: a boy, a girl, and a tall man in a suit. Above them, Noah had written in crooked letters, "Me, Mia, Richard." Underneath, someone had added a single word in lighter pencil: "Home." Mia didn't say anything. She didn't have to. That afternoon, Richard sat in the hospital garden with Noah. The boy was flying one of his handmade kites, a bright yellow one with a red lightning bolt that fluttered wildly in the breeze. "I used to fly kites with Mia at the park," Noah said, eyes on the sky. "She always let me win the races." Richard chuckled, kneeling to help untangle the tail. "She sounds like a good big sister." "She's the best," Noah nodded seriously. "She taught me to tie my shoes, whistle, and keep going even when stuff gets hard." A silence passed between them, gentle but heavy. "You know what she used to say when things got scary?" Noah continued, his voice lower now. "She said, 'Just run toward the sun. If you keep running, the shadows can't catch you.'" Richard felt a lump rise in his throat. He looked at the boy's face, weathered far too early by life, and felt a protective instinct deepen beyond anything he had ever known. "I'll remember that," he said solemnly, "and I'll help you both keep running." As dusk fell, Richard escorted Noah back inside. They found Mia laughing, an actual breathy laugh, as a nurse helped her paint her fingernails pink. The scene startled Richard. He hadn't heard that kind of joy in a long time, not from anyone, least of all himself. Later that evening, Richard sat with both children in the quiet of Mia's room. They played a simple card game on her tray table, Go Fish of all things, and Mia won nearly every round. "I think she's cheating," Richard whispered to Noah. "She's not," Noah grinned. "She's just smarter than us." Mia gave them a sly smirk, her cheeks slightly more flushed than yesterday. By the third game, the kids were dozing off, their heads resting against each other. Richard didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched them, listened to the steady rhythm of their breath, and let himself feel the truth that had crept in slowly, deliberately. He didn't want to go back to his old life. That world of polished offices and hollow applause suddenly felt like a shadow compared to the light these two children brought into his life. He reached into his coat pocket and unfolded the original letter Noah had brought, wrinkled, childishly written, and precious beyond measure. "I make kites. I can run fast. I want to save my sister," it read. "Please." Richard whispered the word to the quiet room. "Please." But now, it wasn't a plea from Noah. It was a promise from him. The following morning brought with it a hush of fragile hope. Richard arrived early at the hospital again, cradling 2 paper bags from a corner bakery, one filled with blueberry muffins, the other with Noah's favorite cheese rolls. He stepped into the room to find Noah already awake, cross-legged on a padded chair, flipping through a weathered scrapbook. "Morning," Richard greeted softly. Noah looked up and smiled. "She's still asleep, but she was humming in her sleep last night. That means she's dreaming. That's good, right?" Richard set the bags down. "That's very good." Noah held up the scrapbook. "Want to see something?" Richard nodded, pulling a chair closer. Noah opened the album to a creased page where a faded photograph had been carefully taped in place. It showed a teenage girl with auburn hair, holding a toddler and standing beside a young boy. Blonde, tall, grinning. "That's my mom," Noah said, pointing to the woman. "That's me when I was a baby. And that—" He hesitated, his voice faltering. "That's someone Mom said looked like our dad, but she never said his name." Richard leaned in, his heart skipping a beat. The boy in the photograph wasn't Noah's father. It was his brother, the unmistakable Hayes jawline, the freckle near the left eye, the slight inward curve of the right shoulder, a childhood injury from falling off a bike. Richard's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just any photo. It was of David, his brother. "I know him," Richard whispered, eyes locked on the image. Noah blinked. "You do?" Richard nodded slowly, 1,000 emotions unspooling in his chest. "He was my older brother. His name was David Hayes." Noah's eyebrows pulled together. "So, that means—" Richard stared at the image again, his voice unsteady. "It means your mother knew my brother, and if that's you in the picture, then—" Noah leaned forward, eyes wide. "Does that mean you're my uncle?" Richard couldn't speak at first. The words tangled in his throat. He hadn't expected this. He'd prepared for medical paperwork, legal petitions, emotional healing. But not this. Not blood. "Yes," he finally said. "I think I am." Noah stared at him, stunned. "So, you're really family?" "I guess I've been all along," Richard whispered, his hands trembling as he traced the edge of the photo. "I just didn't know." A stirring from the bed interrupted them. Mia shifted beneath her blanket, blinking groggily as sunlight filtered through the window. Richard stood, heart still pounding. "Mia?" Noah rushed to her side. "You're awake!" She smiled faintly. "Just barely." Richard moved beside her slowly. "Good morning, Mia." Her eyes met his, and for the first time there was no haze in them, only recognition. "Hi, Mr. Hayes." "You can call me Richard." She nodded, her voice hoarse. "Noah said you've been here every day." "I have." "Why?" Her gaze didn't waver. She was a girl who had spent too long living without certainty, and now she demanded it. Richard exhaled, stepping closer. Because I care. Because someone you loved, someone I loved, would have wanted me to. She tilted her head slightly. My mom? Richard nodded. And your dad. His name was David Hayes. He was my brother. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and sacred. You're really our uncle? She asked, the disbelief clear, but laced with fragile hope. Yes, Richard said again, more firmly, and I'm sorry it took me this long to find you. Mia's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. You didn't know. No, he said, his voice thick. But now that I do, I'm not going anywhere. Mia reached for Noah's hand. The two siblings exchanged a glance that said more than words ever could. A knowing, a connection. Then, surprisingly, Mia reached for Richard's hand as well. Her fingers were cold, delicate. You're here now, she whispered. That matters more. Later that afternoon, as the doctor came in with a more optimistic prognosis and nurses gently shifted Mia to a more upright position, Richard stood in the hallway staring out the window. His thoughts spiraled with the weight of what he had discovered. David had been gone for 12 years. Had he known? Had he written letters that were never sent? Why had Emily never contacted the Hayes family? The questions gnawed at him, but Noah's voice cut through the whirlwind. Hey, Uncle Richard? Richard turned. Noah held up a box. Inside were a stack of handmade kites. I want to teach you how to fly these. Mia always says everyone should know how. Richard smiled, warmth blooming in his chest. I'd like that very much. And with that simple offer, the boy reminded him that while the past was tangled and painful, the future still soared wide and bright, just like a kite, climbing higher when tethered to love. 3 weeks passed in gentle, hopeful rhythm. The days began with nurses checking vitals and ended with Noah's drawings taped to the hospital wall. Kites, trees, suns with smiling faces. In between, Richard found himself becoming something he hadn't imagined. A steady presence. A warm shoulder. An uncle. A man who no longer measured value by quarterly earnings, but by the curve of a child's grin and the calm in a sick girl's breathing. Every afternoon, he'd arrive with something new. Books, puzzles, paper for Noah, soft socks for Mia. The staff had stopped looking surprised. He wasn't the aloof CEO anymore. He was Mr. Hayes, room 408's most faithful visitor. That Wednesday, the room felt different. The morning light streaming through the blinds wasn't the usual gray-blue of Seattle. It was warmer, golden. Richard stood at the foot of the bed watching Mia sleep. Her face had more color now, her breathing less labored. Noah leaned against his side, clutching a crayon. She's been humming again. That's a good sign, Richard said gently. Then, as if drawn by the sound of her brother's voice, Mia stirred. Her lips parted, her brow furrowed slightly. And then, barely above a whisper, she said, Noah. The crayon dropped from Noah's hand. Mia? He breathed. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened, revealing eyes heavy with exhaustion but undeniably alive. She blinked against the light and found her brother's tearful face first. Then her gaze shifted to the man beside him. You came, she whispered, voice thin and raspy. Richard stepped forward, too overwhelmed to speak. All he could do was nod. I told you he would, Noah said, choking back a sob. Mia's eyes filled. I heard you. In my dreams. You never stopped talking to me. I didn't want you to be alone, Noah said. She smiled weakly. I wasn't. It was the smallest exchange, but for Richard, it was seismic. Watching them, he felt something deep inside shift, melt, reform. It wasn't just relief that Mia had spoken. It was what it meant. She had come back. The next few days brought rapid progress. With the expert care Richard had arranged and Mia's own fighting spirit, she began regaining strength. Her voice, once barely a whisper, now held the same sarcastic spark Richard had come to admire in Noah. Their mother's spark, he imagined, the kind that survived storms. Mia's doctor, Dr. Brennan, approached Richard in the hallway one afternoon. "She's responding better than expected," she said with cautious optimism. "The transfer and early interventions helped a great deal." Richard nodded. "Keep doing everything you need, and let me know if more help is needed. Personnel, equipment, anything." The doctor smiled. "We will. You've given her the one thing medicine can't supply: stability." That night, as Richard helped Noah organize a bedside art show, complete with hand-drawn price tags and a not-for-sale kite portrait, Mia quietly watched them. At one point, she asked, "Uncle Richard?" It was the first time she'd said it out loud. The title landed softly between them. He looked over. "Yes? Why are you doing all this? You didn't even know us before." Richard sat down beside her bed, his smile faint. "I didn't know I needed to." Mia nodded thoughtfully. "Mom said people don't always get second chances, but if they do, they should be brave enough to take them." Richard's throat tightened. Your mom was right. The moment lingered, meaningful and unspoken. Later that evening, as Richard was leaving, a woman in a dark gray blazer approached him near the lobby. Her face was lined with fatigue and stress, and she carried an old canvas bag. "You're Richard Hayes?" she asked. "Yes. I'm Elise, Mia and Noah's social worker." Richard extended his hand. "Nice to meet you. Thank you for everything you've done for them." She nodded. "They're good kids. I'm here because, well, a question's come up." He tilted his head. "What kind of question?" Elise pulled out a file. "Legal guardianship." Richard felt the air still around him. "Elena, Mia and Noah's aunt, is technically listed as next of kin, but there's a petition filed this morning. She's requesting full guardianship again, citing concern over who's currently responsible for the kids." Richard's brow furrowed. "I've been their medical proxy and financial supporter, but I haven't filed anything official." "That's why I'm here," Elise said gently. "Before this escalates, would you consider petitioning for legal guardianship?" He didn't respond right away. "It's not about money," Elise added. "It's about where they belong." He looked toward the elevator, picturing the room where 2 children were sleeping. A room where he had come to feel more human than in all his corporate towers combined. He turned back to her. "Yes, I'll do whatever it takes." Elise handed him a pen and form. "Then let's begin." As he signed, a realization settled over him. Not sharp, not dramatic, just steady and sure. These children weren't just part of his past. They were his future. The morning sun spilled through the hospital windows, casting a soft glow on Mia's face as she slowly flipped through a sketchbook Noah had left on her bed. Each page was a memory. Kites flying, Richard's awkward attempts at painting, little stick figure hearts labeled family. She paused on one sketch where he'd drawn her sleeping, with the caption, "Mia gets better, I promise." It was quiet, peaceful, but peace is never permanent. That afternoon, Elise returned with news that twisted Richard's stomach into knots. "Elena filed the formal petition for custody this morning," she said in a hushed voice in the hallway. "She's accusing you of using the kids for, well, let's say, public sympathy. She's implying this is all a PR move." Richard laughed under his breath, bitterly. "I haven't told a soul. No media, no press release, just trying to do the right thing for once. She's got a lawyer, and he's aggressive." Richard pinched the bridge of his nose. "What do we do?" "You'll have to present your case in family court," Elise explained. "And soon. I've scheduled the hearing for Friday. But you'll need something, more than bank accounts and shelter, something personal, something that proves your connection isn't temporary." That night, Richard sat alone in Mia and Noah's apartment. The air was stale, the kind of stillness that hinted at long absences and quiet struggle. He wandered room to room, finally settling in what had once been their mother's bedroom. On the dresser sat a shoebox marked "For Later." Inside were carefully stacked letters, photographs, and scraps of drawings folded like prayers. Near the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was an "If he ever comes back, give this to him." Richard hesitated, heart pounding. He opened it slowly. The letter was dated nearly 8 years earlier, the handwriting shaky but unmistakable. "Dear Richard, if you're reading this, you must have found them. Mia and Noah, our kids. I never wanted to raise them without you. I never stopped hoping you'd come back. But when I realized you wouldn't, I decided to stop waiting and start building a life anyway. They are everything I ever dreamed we'd have. Kind, funny, resilient, and so much like you it sometimes hurt to look at them. Mia's got your stubborn eyes. Noah, he's your heart, big and full and never gives up. I don't know if you're still angry. I don't even know if you believe they're yours, but they are. And if you ever come back, please, don't be afraid to love them. They don't need perfect. They need real. And deep down, I still believe you're real." Emily, by the time he finished reading, his hands were trembling. The next morning, Richard brought the letter to the hospital. He didn't show it to the children. Not yet, but it lived in the breast pocket of his jacket like a shield. He knew what he had to do. When Friday arrived, the courtroom was a modest one, its worn wood panels and buzzing fluorescence a far cry from the boardrooms he was used to dominating. Mia and Noah waited outside with Elise while Richard took the stand. Elena sat across the aisle, her expression tight, lips thin with judgment. Her lawyer wasted no time painting Richard as a billionaire playing savior for good optics. "He has no parenting experience. He has no legal claim. The mother is deceased. This man has simply inserted himself." Richard stayed calm until it was his turn. "I didn't insert myself," he said clearly. "I was found." He recounted the day Noah showed up at his office, the paper kite, the rain, the pleading eyes, then the park, the story, the truth that unspooled like thread through his heart. He spoke of late-night hospital visits, Mia's awakening, the first time she whispered his name. Then, gently, he reached into his coat and pulled out the letter. "This is from their mother," he said. "She wrote it in case I ever returned. She never told them to hate me. She didn't fill them with anger. She asked that I not be afraid." The judge took the letter, reading it silently. The room was quiet but for the creak of a chair and the scribble of a pen. "I'm not a perfect man," Richard added, "but I know love when it looks me in the eye. Mia and Noah are mine. I don't need a blood test to feel it." Elena's lawyer stood to object, but the judge held up his hand. "I've heard enough," he said. The gavel fell with a dull knock. "Guardianship is granted to Mr. Richard Hayes." Outside the courtroom, Mia squeezed Noah's hand tightly. When Richard emerged, the children ran to him. Not with hesitation, but with certainty. She asked, "Does this mean we're staying with you forever?" Richard knelt down, hands resting on their shoulders. "Yes," he said, voice cracking. "Forever sounds just about right." The front gate creaked open slowly, revealing a winding cobblestone driveway that curved through a grove of towering trees, golden leaves fluttering in the crisp autumn wind. At the end stood a 2-story house with wide windows, a wraparound porch, and smoke gently rising from the chimney. It was nothing like Richard's penthouse in the city. It wasn't sleek or cold or metallic. It was warm. It was real. It was home. Noah sat in the back seat beside his sister, pressing his nose to the glass as the car rolled forward. "Is this it?" he whispered, his breath fogging the window. Mia, her face still pale from recovery, smiled faintly. "It looks like a house from a book." Richard turned from the driver's seat and nodded, voice soft but steady. "It's ours." He hadn't told them much in advance, just that it would be somewhere new, somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't have to worry anymore. They stepped out slowly, boots crunching on the gravel. The air smelled of pine and distant rain. The wind carried laughter from a neighbor's yard, a dog barked, and in that moment, Richard realized this wasn't just a place, it was a beginning. Inside, the house was still quiet with newness. Boxes were unpacked but not yet lived in. A cozy den held a fireplace, its mantel lined with blank picture frames waiting for memories. Upstairs, 2 rooms sat side by side, one with twin beds under sloped ceilings, the other smaller, quieter, Mia's. She ran her fingers over the windowsill, gaze drifting toward the horizon. "You like it?" Richard asked gently, standing in the doorway. Mia turned to him, her voice fragile but sincere. "It's the kind of place Mom would have picked." That simple sentence made his throat tighten. Downstairs, Noah explored the kitchen, opening every drawer like a tiny inspector. "We have a toaster!" he cried. "And real silverware, not the bendy kind." Richard chuckled as he joined him. "Wait until you see the backyard." They stepped through the back door and onto a wide stretch of grass. Beyond the fence was a gentle slope that led to a quiet pond. Along the fence line fluttered dozens of brightly colored paper shapes, kites, every one of them tied to the rails. Noah gasped. "You kept them." "I asked the nurses to save every one you gave Mia," Richard said, crouching down beside him. "They reminded me what hope looks like." A soft voice came from the porch steps. "You didn't just save them," said a woman in her 50s, her tone a blend of surprise and admiration. "You built them a whole new world." Richard stood quickly. "Anna?" She nodded and stepped forward. "I'm their aunt. I came to thank you." Anna Jensen was Emily's older cousin, the only extended family who'd made an effort after Emily passed. She lived 2 states away but had stayed in contact with the social worker. When Richard reached out after the court decision, inviting her to visit, she didn't hesitate. "I didn't know if I was making the right decision," he confessed, leading her inside. "I've never raised children. I wasn't even sure I was capable of being what they need." Anna smiled gently. "None of us ever are. But you showed up, and that's the part most people don't get right." They sat in the living room while Mia and Noah unpacked books upstairs. Anna reached into her bag and pulled out a worn envelope. "I think Emily would have wanted you to have this." Richard took it cautiously. Inside was a photograph, one he'd never seen. Emily, holding 2 bundled babies, her face exhausted but glowing. Noah's tiny fist was curled beside her cheek. Mia's eyes, his eyes, already watching the world with cautious wonder. On the back was a simple message, written in Emily's unmistakable hand. "Our adventure started without you, but it's not too late to catch up." The tears came silently, not because of guilt anymore, but because of gratitude. Somehow, against every odd, he'd been given the chance to rewrite everything. That night, after dinner and cocoa and the chaotic brushing of teeth that left toothpaste on the walls, Richard tucked the children into their beds. Mia was already half asleep, a novel clutched to her chest. In the next room, Noah lay under a thick quilt, eyes wide open. "Uncle Richard?" he asked, his voice hushed. Richard sat on the edge of the bed. "Yeah, buddy. Are we going to be okay now?" Richard leaned down and smoothed the boy's hair back. "We already are." Noah smiled, then rolled onto his side. As his breathing slowed, Richard sat in the dark for a long while, just listening. Tomorrow, there would be routines to learn, school forms to fill, appointments to juggle. There would be tantrums and scraped knees and missed bedtimes. But there would also be joy. He rose and glanced down the hall toward his own room, one that now held the letter, the photograph, and an unfamiliar feeling he hadn't let himself believe in for years. Peace. The morning sun bathed the house in soft gold, pouring through the wide kitchen windows like a silent promise. Toast popped, cereal crunched, and the quiet chatter of a family finding its rhythm filled the air. It was a Saturday, one without appointments, hospital visits, or hard decisions. Just a day, just theirs. Noah stood by the back porch, a red spool of string clutched in his hand. A kite fluttered at his side, yellow with green spirals, his own design. Richard walked out, coffee in hand, smiling gently. "You flying that one today?" he asked. Noah nodded. "Mia helped me pick the colors. She said yellow means hope." Richard's chest tightened, warmed by a sensation he was still learning to trust. Pride. "Ready when you are," he said, setting down his mug and ruffling Noah's hair. They stepped into the backyard. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the pond sparkled under the rising sun. Mia came out next, bundled in her robe, still fragile but smiling. "Don't let him crash it," she teased. "I'm a professional now," Noah replied proudly, lifting the kite overhead. Richard helped him unfurl the string, and with a running start, the kite caught the wind and soared. It danced against the sky, a streak of yellow sunlight against the pale blue canvas above. For a moment, all three of them just watched, speechless. "I think she'd like it here," Mia said quietly, watching the sky. "Who?" Richard asked, though he already knew. "Mom," she whispered. "I think she'd like how you take care of us." Richard's throat tightened. "I hope so. I think about her a lot." "Me too," Noah added, adjusting the kite string with delicate care. "But I think she knew about you." Richard tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Noah pulled something from his jacket pocket, a folded drawing, the edges worn. He handed it to Richard. It was a child's sketch. 3 stick figures standing beneath a bright sun. One was labeled me, the other Mia, and beside them, holding both their hands, was a third. His label read, "My Real Dad." "I drew it a long time ago," Noah said. "Before we met, I just had this dream. Once. He had your eyes." Richard knelt beside him, folding the drawing gently. "Thank you. That means more than you know." A car pulled into the driveway then. Anna. She stepped out with a canvas bag in hand and a huge grin. "You're all out here early," she called. "It's kite day," Mia said, smiling. Anna laughed. "That explains the dozen strings stuck in the trees down the road." Richard stood and helped her with the bag. "You're staying for lunch?" "If I'm allowed," she teased. "But, more importantly, I brought these." She pulled out a set of small wooden frames and handed one to each of them. "For your rooms," she said. "Thought you might want to hang something of your own." Mia took hers delicately, examining the carved edges. Noah immediately dashed inside to retrieve his drawing. Richard turned to Anna, grateful. "You've done so much. You gave them a home, Richard," she said warmly. "That's more than I ever could." After lunch, the kids helped set up a picnic blanket in the backyard. They sprawled across it, laughing, reading, and eating peanut butter sandwiches cut into stars. At one point, Noah sat up and turned to Richard. "Are you really staying?" Richard looked at both children, his gaze steady, his voice unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere." Later that evening, Richard wandered into the living room, now adorned with framed drawings, paper flowers, and the kind of clutter that meant people truly lived there. He passed by a side table where his brother's old photo stood, next to a newer one. A picture of Richard, Mia, and Noah flying a kite on the hospital lawn, captured by a nurse with tears in her eyes. He sat on the couch and exhaled. Peace, joy, family. Words he once kept distant, now part of his everyday vocabulary. From upstairs came a small shout. "Uncle Richard!" He looked up as Noah leaned over the railing. "Mia says come quick." He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, heart jumping, not from panic, but anticipation. In Mia's room, soft music played and the windows glowed with sunset. On her bed sat a small cardboard box. She handed it to him with a mischievous grin. "Open it." Inside was a small wooden plaque. Burned into the surface were the words, "Our real dad. He came back." Beneath it, two smaller handprints in paint, one red, one blue. Richard stared at it, overcome. "I didn't know what to say," Mia murmured, "but Noah said those words the day we moved in, and I wanted you to have something to hang up." He sat down beside her, cradling the gift like it was made of glass. "I've built towers," he said softly, "and companies and empires, but this is the only thing I want on my wall." He looked at both of them, emotion flooding his voice. I love you both, and I'm proud, so proud, to be your dad." They leaned in, wrapping their arms around him tightly. For a long moment, they said nothing. They didn't need to. Outside, the yellow kite still danced in the fading light, a reminder of everything they'd lost, and everything they'd found.